Hi everyone, welcome back. I hope you're all doing well. So the case we are covering today is another messed up cult. And just like every other cult we have covered on this channel, the acts of this cult are truly disturbing. We are talking mind control, multiple wives, physical abuse, sexual abuse, electric shock therapy, and some very brutal and sadistic murders. And who was the leader of today's cult? Well, that is an evil man named Gerald Cruz. And his cult got away with some of the most awful activities for years, right in the middle of California. And I honestly cannot believe that this cult doesn't have more coverage. So there is a good chance you've never even heard of this cult before. So that is what we are going to be covering today. So let's jump in. And I just want to give a huge thank you to today's sponsor, and that is Matchmasters. And I am so excited for today's sponsor because just like I did a few months ago, I am teaming up with Matchmasters to do the most amazing giveaway where you can win all of the prizes behind me, which include the new Dyson hairdryer, a Stanley Cup, some of my favorite products from my favorite beauty brands, plus a brand new iPad. And some of these beauty products are my holy grails, like this Vieve set here. I use these products all of the time. They are so good. We've also got some Fenty, some Tatcha, some Elemis, and I have recently just started using the new Dyson hairdryer myself. Incredible. Like some really good brands in this giveaway. And all of the prizes come to a total of $1,500. This giveaway is crazy. And to be in for a chance of winning this absolutely incredible giveaway, all you have to do is download Matchmasters using my link, which is down below, or the QR code that is on your screen right now. And once you've downloaded the game through my link only, you just need to play the game for a little bit, earn a minimum of 1 star, and then enter into something called Danielle Kirsty's Star Race. And this is how you can win all of these amazing prizes. And on top of all of this, Matchmasters is just an amazing game anyway to play. It is a really cute match 3 puzzle game. It is incredibly engaging. It keeps my brain so focused. It is the perfect game to play when you're just out and about in the world and you need a quick distraction. And for those of you that already play Matchmasters, and I know there is a lot of you, I have another amazing opportunity to tell you about, because Matchmasters have just launched their new Masters Market. And this is a brand new online website that you can't find in the app itself. You have to specifically go to a different website. And I will leave a link to that website in the description box down below, don't worry. And you can get all kinds of packages, coins, and boosters at a massive discount that you will never see inside the app itself. And if that wasn't good enough in itself, you can use the code Danielle10 to get an even bigger discount on top of that, which is just absolutely incredible. So if you guys wanted to check out Matchmasters for yourself, click on the link in my description box or scan the QR code on your screen right now and download the game for free. And using my link and the QR code really does help out this channel because it lets Matchmasters know that you came from this video. And go and download the game. Go and enter this incredible giveaway because you could win $1,500 worth of goodies. And this is a limited opportunity, so I would recommend downloading the game straight away so you are in with a chance of winning these amazing prizes. So thank you again to Matchmasters for sponsoring today's video, but thank you to every single one of you watching right now because truly without all of you guys, I wouldn't get opportunities like this. And now let's jump into today's case. Gerald Cruz was born in March of 1962. An exact date of birth is not known, but as he was born in March, he is either a Pisces or an Aries. And he grew up in Modesto, California, where the rest of today's case takes place. Now, growing up, Gerald came from a very unstable family, household. Like truly, that is actually an understatement. First of all, his childhood was extremely disruptive. His parents were always arguing, fighting. It was just a very toxic environment for a child to be in. Gerald was severely neglected, which did lead to some pretty serious injuries. When he was just 6 months old, he was dropped on his head onto the concrete porch. Yeah, only 6 months old and he's dropped straight on his head. When he was just 4 years old, he was a passenger in a car. He was in the front seat. He wasn't wearing a seatbelt. His mom, who was driving, slammed on the brakes and Gerald went through the windscreen. Yeah, he's only 4 and he has gone flying through the windscreen. It's honestly a miracle that he even survived. But that wasn't the only thing going on in Gerald's childhood. Oh no, what happens next is baffling because Gerald was actually confused about who his real parents were. Because he lived with his two parents, mom and dad, and his older sister who was 26 years old, and her name was Hope. So just like any child living in that situation, you would think that your parents are your parents and your older sister is your older sister. However, that was actually not the case. Gerald's older sister, Hope, was actually his mom, not his sister. And who he thought was his mom was actually his grandmother. And Gerald had no idea about this. It was this huge family secret. His older sister had given birth to Gerald when she was younger. And I don't know whether they were ashamed that she gave birth, like out of wedlock. Oh no. I don't really know, but for some reason they decided to cover up the fact that Gerald was actually Hope's, the older sister's child. And Gerald only found out about this because one day when he was at school, his teacher accidentally revealed the truth. Don't ask me why the teacher knows, because I don't know why the teacher has to know, but this is how Gerald found out, that his sister is actually his mom. And as you can imagine, Gerald was shocked beyond belief. Can you just imagine being a child finding out that your sister is actually your mom? Yeah, it's pretty messed up. He just kept thinking that his whole life had been a lie. And when he went to ask his parents about this, his parents didn't want to acknowledge this. They were like, what? Sorry, what? What did you say? No, can't hear you. We're not going to talk about that. That was the attitude that they had. They didn't want to address it. So even though Gerald went to his mom, went to his dad to ask about this, no one talked to him about it. So he was left to deal with this mind-blowing new information on his own. And Gerald remained completely confused for many years to come. So the years go by and then something else starts to happen because Gerald started to receive terrible abuse at home. Whenever he misbehaved, he was punished severely by his mom/grandmother, because I'm pretty sure that Gerald still had to call his grandmother mom and refer to his sister, who was his mom, as his sister. It's very confusing. But yes, his mom/grandmother is now physically abusing Gerald. She would whip him with a cane, with a piece of rope, an iron cord. He would also be beaten with an umbrella, a coat hanger, a stick, pretty much anything that she could get her hands on. Around this time, Gerald was also being bullied at school. He was teased for his appearance, for his hair, his clothes. He had no friends whatsoever, but he was also teased about the fact that he didn't know who his parents were. And he would get beaten up by the other children in his school. Like, it was terrible bullying. So Gerald felt incredibly isolated from everyone. He didn't feel comfortable at school. He didn't feel comfortable at home. But his parents also never socialized with anyone. They were an incredibly isolated family. So Gerald was just shut in his bedroom all day, every day, whenever he wasn't at school. He was also never allowed to date girls as he got older. He was never allowed to bring girls around to the house. He was never allowed friends around at the house either, but he never really had any friends anyway. But even if he did make friends, he was never allowed to bring anyone over. And to just put the nail in the coffin, just to make Gerald's whole childhood just the worst of the worst, his mom/grandmother also started abusing animals in front of him. So yeah, she's a terrible human being, isn't she? Yeah. There was one time, and I'm really sorry, this is going to be awful to hear, but there was one time where she got a cat and she just cut the stomach open of this cat in front of Gerald. And I don't know if the cat was still alive when she did this, but either way, that's just so horrific. Why would you do that? But then there was this one time where Gerald's mom/grandmother got so angry at a neighbor's dog because the dog had wandered onto her front yard. So in retaliation, she got an axe and chopped off the dog's back leg so the dog couldn't walk anymore. And oh my God, I'm lost for words. Why would you do that? How can anyone do that to an animal? Just because the dog wandered onto her property. Yeah, disgusting. She's horrible, vile. So we eventually get to Gerald when he turns 18. We are now in the 1980s. He finishes school, he moves out, he finally gets away from his insane abusive family. However, this is when Gerald had a massive identity crisis. which I think is understandable. The fact that Gerald never truly knew who his parents were, I mean, obviously he knew that his sister was technically his biological mom, but the fact that that was never addressed, it was never spoken about, everyone just wanted to ignore the situation, and he never knew who his biological dad was. It had a huge effect on him. Of course it would. He just felt like an oddball. He felt like he just wasn't wanted by anybody. He also still has no friends, and he started to feel very angry at the world. He just felt like a social outcast, like he had no purpose in life, that he just didn't belong. He gained a huge distrust in authorities and just the whole system of society. He felt like the system had let him down, which I don't know why he thinks that, because it's his family that have let him down. I don't quite know how the system has let him down. I don't know. But he just was getting very, very angry. He was having a lot of destructive feelings. And this is when Gerald started to display the cult-like tendencies that we will go on to see for the rest of today's case. So where did this all begin? So Gerald, he got a job as a bouncer in a strip club, and he worked at this strip club every single night. He was meeting a lot of new people, and he was meeting a lot of people that were quite similar to him. People that were just down and out, people that just felt angry at the world, people that felt like oddballs, they didn't quite fit in. Some of them may have been homeless or struggling to get a job, people that didn't really have any friends or family. And Gerald finally felt like he was finding people that were the same as him. He quickly related to these people. It was actually the first time in his life where he did relate to people. So Gerald, he was being social for the first time. He was talking to all of these people every single night because most of them were regulars. And the more he got to talk to these people, the more he went on these really long rants, especially about the government and about how the whole system needs to completely be torn down and be started again. And these people that Gerald was speaking to were enamored by him. They were like, yeah, you know what? You're right. That is what needs to happen. I think this is the first time that Gerald actually did realize that he can be quite charismatic. He actually was quite charming, especially to these people that he was coming across in the strip club. People were hanging on his every word, and he had never experienced this before. This was a completely new feeling for Gerald. The fact that he was basically the center of attention, that people actually were listening to him. He became incredibly egotistical. It really truly did start to go to his head. And it was the best feeling in the world to him because he had never had friends before. And now he felt like he had a whole bunch of people that were listening to him, that were interested in him. The power started to really excite him, and his personality started to change. He became incredibly arrogant, self-entitled, and this was the foundation that really did turn Gerald into the evil cult leader that we will go on to see. Because as he was gaining more friends, they are friends at this point, not quite followers. But yeah, as he was gaining this larger group of friends at the strip club that were hanging on his every word, he met a man that is very significant to today's case. And that is a man by the name of James Beck. And this is where everything would change, because James basically became Gerald's right-hand man, his enforcer. Truly, I do mean that. His enforcer. So James was born in 1956. He was around 6 years older than Gerald. And James had grown up in a very religious family. He would go to church every single weekend. He was a part of the church choir. He knew the Bible front to back. However, James had also had a lot of disruption in his childhood. When he was just 17 years old, his dad was caught sexually abusing his sisters. So his dad was sent to prison. So James grew up really resenting, hating his dad. However, as he entered his 20s, he did get married, went on to have 3 children. But then his wife became addicted to drugs and alcohol, wasn't able to fully look after the children. So James did end up getting a divorce, and James ended up with full custody of the children. And James went to live with his parents, who I assume is his mom and maybe a stepdad. So James took the 3 children to go and live with his parents. But after his divorce, he completely changed, because James before the divorce was an amazing guy, great family man, really good dad to his children. But then after his divorce, he became very angry at society. Sound familiar? He started visiting the local strip club more and more, and who did he meet at the local strip club? Well, of course, he met Gerald Cruz. And as soon as these two met, they hit it off. They had loads in common, i.e., they were angry, they wanted to bring the system down, and they blamed everybody else for their problems other than themselves. So yes, they were two peas in a pod. So Gerald started to fill James's head with all of his nonsense. And nonsense being bringing the system down, like they needed to do this. And James has been described as a natural follower. He didn't really like making decisions for himself. So finding someone like Gerald was perfect because he literally did just start following him, hanging on his every word, believing everything that Gerald said, and just completely idolizing Gerald. So as time went on, James started spending more and more time with Gerald. James was spending more time at Gerald's home, and Gerald was starting to manipulate James. He started telling James to start spending less time with his family, spend less time with his kids. He started to say that his family were a burden, that they were just a shackle to him and he needed to break free from those shackles. And James, being a complete idiot, started following what Gerald said. He started to spend less time with his children, who once upon a time he loved and was devoted to. And his personality just completely changed. Only within a matter of weeks of meeting Gerald, James stopped attending church, which is something that he did every single weekend. He was very religious, very devoted to the church. But after only spending a few weeks with Gerald, he was like, nope, don't believe in God anymore. He was moody, angry, argumentative, and he was fully under Gerald's control. It's just crazy, actually, how quickly Gerald was able to manipulate James completely. So this is basically the beginning of the cult. It basically just starts with the two of them, Gerald and his right-hand man / enforcer, James. So Gerald starts saying to James, well, in order for us to take down the system, in order for us to change society and bring everything down, we need a larger group of people, i.e. a cult. So they both start recruiting more people. It was mainly people from the strip club. And this really is when the cult starts to take shape, because Gerald continued on with his job as the bouncer at the strip club. And he was now more focused. He had a purpose. He was like, okay, I've got all of these people that are regulars in the strip club. They're all hanging off my every word. I am so important to them. It will be so easy to manipulate them and get them under my control, just like I've done with James. So he was going to all of the people that he had befriended in the strip club, the people that were angry themselves at society, that believed that they were social outcasts. Some of them were homeless, very vulnerable. And he started to lure all of these outcasts to him. He started to tell them that he could change the world, that they could live in a world where they wouldn't feel like that. So he would invite them to secret meetings, and he would basically preach to them that he was this almighty powerful person that could basically change their lives. And like I've already mentioned, a lot of the people that he was luring into his cult were vulnerable. They maybe were homeless, struggling financially. So Gerald, as a control tactic, would invite those people to come and live in his home, give them a place to stay, give them a warm meal. And it was just so manipulative because these people started to look to Gerald as almost their savior. He's this great guy, like, look how selfless he is. He really does want to change the world for the better. And it was just an easy way for Gerald to have complete control over people. But there were other members from the strip club that followed Gerald as well. There were other bouncers, bartenders, rock band members, even some of the dancers themselves followed Gerald. But it went even further than just the strip club. Like, the local dentist followed Gerald, a college law student, even the church pastor started to buy into what Gerald was saying. And they all followed Gerald because they had one thing in common. In some way or another, they felt like an outcast, or they felt like society was just against them. And Gerald managed to grow his cult to 55 members. That is a lot of people that are now following Gerald. It's actually crazy how big this cult was. And this group would now meet on a regular basis. So what were the group's Beliefs, exactly. Well, essentially, Gerald is brainwashing the group with a mixture of white supremacist ideology mixed with various satanic rituals. Now, we are in the 80s right now. This is pretty much right in the middle of the satanic panic, and Gerald was really using this to his advantage. He started forcing all of these strange practices on the group. He would force them all to wear white robes and gather in dark rooms, and they would dance and chant around candles. And then in true cult leader fashion, Gerald started telling all of his followers that he had special powers. And what was one of these special powers? Well, he could communicate with God. It's like all cult leaders, they're like the same, aren't they? It's crazy. Gerald had said that he was speaking with spirits, and the spirits had a very important message for his group, because the greatest thing that his followers could do would be to, quote, sacrifice their newborn for the satisfaction of Satan. He would carry out voodoo rituals and ceremonies, which apparently showed his followers that he had magical powers. He called himself a high priest, and he would put curses on people. And something that I always just find so baffling is that his followers were just lapping everything up. They were believing everything. And I'm just like, how can you believe stuff like this? Like, truly, how do you believe it? So this goes on for a while, all of these rituals and secret meetings, and just slowly growing this group until something else very significant happens, because Gerald, he realizes that he's a cult leader now. Like, he needs a partner. So he goes out and finds himself a girlfriend. But was this a girlfriend that was his own age? No, he wanted someone younger, much younger. And I'm talking, he wanted a child. Yeah. So he went out and got himself a 16-year-old girlfriend. Gerald is 25 years old at this point, and he meets a girl named Jennifer Starn, who was just 16 years old. So she's a teenager, but she's a child. She's 16. What does he want with a 16-year-old? Oh, I know what he wants with a 16-year-old. She's incredibly vulnerable and easy to manipulate. And Gerald, he basically does manipulate her. He charms her. He is grooming her. There is no other way to say it. And Jennifer believes that she has fallen for Gerald. And Jennifer now enters this cult as the leader's girlfriend. She moves in with Gerald, and again, in true cult style, it wasn't long until Jennifer fell pregnant, because cult leaders also seem to have that other thing in common, don't they? They want as many children as they can. But unfortunately for Jennifer, her life would go quickly downhill the moment that she joined the cult. She did not have it easy whatsoever. But was Gerald satisfied with Jennifer alone? Oh no, because it turns out that he's incredibly original, and himself as a cult leader, he wants multiple wives. Never heard of that one before either. So at this point, his right-hand man, James, had got himself a girlfriend, a woman named Rosemary. She worked as a dancer at the strip club, and James and Rosemary had been dating for a few years now. But one day, Gerald just goes up to James and says, I think I want your girlfriend as my wife. Yeah, literally, he just goes up to James and says, I want your girlfriend as my wife. Now, any reasonable person would say, hell no. But obviously, James is completely 100% devoted to Gerald. He just agrees. And he tells his girlfriend, Rosemary, that she now needs to become the wife of Gerald, and she has no other choice. He actually went to Rosemary and said that it was, quote, the right thing to do. And Rosemary apparently agrees. I don't know how willingly she agrees, but apparently she agrees. And she now becomes Gerald's wife. Now, I don't know how legal this is. Like, did they actually legally get married, or was it just one of those situations where Gerald, because he's this almighty being, did he just declare that Rosemary was his wife? It was probably the latter, but I can't obviously be sure. So as we are moving forward now, the cult continues to grow. Gerald, again, is sticking with the same tactics that he has from the beginning. He basically is targeting vulnerable people. He just wants to build his numbers up, basically. He wants to make himself feel as special as possible. And he's going towards vulnerable people. He's inviting them to live at his home. And at this point, Gerald is now living in a trailer park in Salida, California. So as the cult continues to grow, as he's inviting more and more people to come and live with him, Gerald adds 2 extra trailers to his land, and this is basically where a lot of his followers are living. They're basically living in this little commune that is on a trailer park. So not everyone in the trailer park is a part of the cult. It's just like this little corner that he has. And how was Gerald able to afford to do this? Well, of course, he made money from his cult followers. So any of his followers that had a job, he instructed them to give him all of their wages. He brainwashed them into thinking that they needed to give him their wages because they were living as this group. It was shared resources. They worked together, lived together. They were this family. But of course, this family cult, they had rules to follow. They were categorically not allowed to socialize with anyone outside of the cult, because people outside of the cult, they have dangerous views. Oh no, you can't talk to people. Interaction with people outside of the cult was forbidden. Gerald even gave his new little cult a name, and the name of this cult was The Cause. Pretty terrible name if you ask me. Sometimes he did refer to the cult as the Order of the Lion. Don't know what a lion has to do with this either. He also gave a name to the little commune that they were all living on, and that was the camp. So this is the cause living at the camp. And he started to say that his cult was starting, quote, a new advancement of mankind. He really did think that his cult were going to change the way people lived. And I am just sat here completely and utterly baffled, because I'm like, what are they actually doing? They're not actually doing anything. They're all just living together and following these stupid rules that Gerald is making them follow. How is that going to change the world? But Gerald's followers, especially the ones that lived with him, they looked up to Gerald as basically a surrogate parent. In their eyes, he had completely turned their lives around, because his followers, they now felt like they had purpose, that they had a reason to be here, that they belonged somewhere. And he was so charismatic, so charming, that he really did manipulate his followers into thinking that he could change the world for the better. And his followers would soon be willing to do anything for him. But as the group continued to grow, there was one thing that Gerald quickly realized, and that is that he needed to keep control over this group, because the larger the group got, the harder it was to control. And this is where things start to get very cult-like. And things do start to get very disturbing from this moment, I just want to warn you. Because Gerald recruits a couple more members to his cult. The first is a man named Ricky Vieira. Or should I say boy, because when he recruits him, he is only 15 years old. Now, like most people in Gerald's cult, Ricky had had a difficult upbringing. He had a very unstable home life. His dad had introduced him to marijuana at just the age of 8. And Ricky had been a habitual user ever since. He had trouble in school. He had trouble reading. He was also suspended multiple times from high school for marijuana possession. He then dropped out of high school entirely. And when he was only 15 years old, he got introduced to Gerald Cruz, i.e. today's cult leader. And the second man that Gerald recruited into his cult that is very significant is a man named Stephen Perkins. Now, he was currently 20 years old, so he is an adult, and he got introduced to the cult because James, the right-hand man, had been a family friend for a while and had known Stephen from a very young age. So the recruitment of these two men is very significant, Ricky and Stephen, because from the get-go, Gerald wanted to make these two men an example to the rest of the cult. He basically used these two men to instill fear into the rest of the cult. He wanted to send a message to the rest of the cult, i.e. the message was, if you ever go against me, if you ever leave the cult, this is what will happen to you. So Gerald started treating both Ricky and Stephen abysmally. It started with isolating both of them from their families. They were required to be at the cult compound at all times. They were only ever allowed to go and visit their families when they had written permission from Gerald, which was rare. So they rarely saw their families, but even when they did see their families, it was completely controlled by Gerald. Because when Ricky and Stephen did go home, they were not allowed to do anything without Gerald's permission. And I truly mean that. So they would go and visit their families, and their families would cook like a big family dinner. But Stephen and Ricky were not allowed to eat any food unless they got permission from Gerald. It went further than that. They weren't even allowed to have a drink at their family's home without Gerald's permission. And over time, the families of Ricky and Stephen were becoming incredibly worried about their loved one, because in front of their eyes, Ricky and Stephen were just wasting away. They were becoming a shell of the person that they once were. They were very withdrawn, moody, argumentative. Both men also started to lose a lot of weight. And I'm talking a lot of weight. I'm talking 125 pounds in a year. Both men also displayed injuries often, such as black eyes, a fat lip, a slash on their arm. They were both incredibly paranoid, shaky, jumped at any small sound. They were so fearful of everything. It was so obvious that abuse was happening. And the families of the both men would beg them to leave Gerald, to leave this cult, even though I don't think they realized that their loved one was in a cult, but they begged their loved one to leave Gerald and move back in with the family. But every single time, the two young men, they refused. And abuse was happening in this cult. Gerald and his cronies, mostly James, they were abusing Stephen and Ricky. Gerald demanded complete control over Stephen and Ricky. He controlled every single aspect of their lives. They were not even allowed to breathe without Gerald's permission. He controlled what they ate, when they were able to have a shower, if they were even allowed a shower. He controlled when they slept. He controlled who they were allowed to interact with and at what times. Gerald demanded complete obedience from both men. He would often make them stand in the corner of a room for long periods of time. He would force them to do all of the chores on the camp, all of the cooking, cleaning, just waiting on others. They had to look after the children at the camp. They even had to stay awake all night to, quote, guard the camp from intruders, or whatever Gerald was paranoid about on that day. So the pair became incredibly sleep deprived. They were hallucinating. They were still losing so much weight. Their mental health took a complete nosedive. And if either one of them ever went against Gerald's rules, they would be severely punished. First of all, if either one of them misbehaved, Gerald would make them stand in the corner with their arms raised above their head, whilst his right-hand man, James, would punch them repeatedly in the stomach. And something that is very important to note is that Gerald himself never lifted a finger. He never himself physically abused anybody. He would always get somebody else to do it. And most of the time it was James, his enforcer. James would always blindly follow every single one of Gerald's commands. James would slap Ricky and Stephen. He would kick them, punch them, hit them over the head with objects. And these beatings would happen so often. Sometimes Ricky and Stephen could barely move after being beaten. He would also force them to strip naked. There was one time where he forced Stephen to lie on the ground naked whilst he kicked him in his genitals. Stephen and Ricky would also be locked in dark rooms with shackles around their ankles. But it wasn't just the two men that were receiving beatings. Oh no. We unfortunately need to get back to Gerald's teenage girlfriend, Jennifer. Now, Gerald himself actually did physically abuse his girlfriend, Jennifer. And if Jennifer ever, quote, stepped out of line, Gerald would whip her over the head over and over again with a cane, sometimes up to 100 times. And this is very reminiscent of the physical abuse that Gerald suffered from his mom/grandmother. Gerald also threatened to kill Jennifer on multiple occasions. He put a gun in her mouth and said, "Are you going to get your shit together or are you going to die?" And he would repeatedly beat her over and over again. Gerald's other wife, Rosemary, would also be beaten as well, although she was usually beaten up by her now ex-boyfriend, James. He also would place rifles in her mouth and be told that she would be killed if she ever tried to escape. But there was actually one time where Rosemary did try and escape, but James and some other cult members just drove after her and got her back. And she was severely beaten when she was taken back to the camp. And Gerald said to Rosemary that if she ever tried to escape again, he would cut off her head and keep her head as a trophy. And it went on like this for a while, but then Gerald, he got bored of just beatings. So he decided to escalate the punishments in the cult even further. And what were these new punishments that Gerald came up with? Well, it was electric shock treatment. He first bought a stun gun. He then forced James to taser Ricky and Stephen whilst they jumped in the air. He also would taser his girlfriend Jennifer, but it got even worse than that because Gerald soon introduced something that he called electric cord treatment. And honestly, this is one of the worst things I have ever heard in my life. It literally makes me shiver. It makes my skin crawl because it involved Gerald taking an extension cord, cutting it in half so the electrical wires were exposed. And this punishment most often involved only Stephen. I don't know why, but Gerald definitely took more of a disliking towards Stephen for some reason. So what I'm about to tell you is what used to happen to Stephen. So with this electrical cord cut in half so the electrical wires are exposed, he would take the exposed wires and wrap them around Stephen's toes. He would even shove one of the wires so hard in the skin between his toes, like he would actually put the wire in his skin. Oh my god, I can't. Ugh. And then he would plug the other end into the power outlet and turn it on. And this would send the mains electricity into Stephen's toes, like literally directly into his skin. Stephen would instantly begin jerking around, rolling around, screaming out in pain. And Gerald found this absolutely hilarious. He loved doing this. This was a form of entertainment for him because he would do this to Stephen over and over again. Gerald would make Stephen perform chores such as scrubbing the floors whilst doing this to him. So Stephen would be on his hands and knees scrubbing this floor with an electrical wire stuck between his toes, and he would constantly be electrocuted every now and then whilst he's doing chores. And this went on for so long, he was subjected to this punishment so many times that Stephen's toes became burnt all over. They became infected, and then Stephen's whole foot turned black. And I just have no words. How did he even come up with a punishment like that? So like I said, Gerald wanted to make an example out of Stephen and Ricky. They were the main two that faced the punishments. And so far that was enough. The rest of the cult always stayed in line because they feared that they would be punished like Stephen and Ricky. However, now these beatings, these punishments extended to other members of the cult. He had a new control tactic that Gerald called his wheel of punishment. And it was basically like a wheel of fortune, but just with punishments on it. So it was basically a wheel, and in different sections of the wheel, there were different punishments. And Gerald would make the cult members throw this wheel up into the air, and they had to catch it between their finger and their thumb, and wherever their finger landed, that is the punishment they were subjected to. And these punishments started off mild, and even these mild punishments are terrible. So these mild punishments, Gerald would make his cult members eat their food off of the floor. He would make them strip naked and humiliate and embarrass them. But then the punishments escalated to sexual assaults. There was one time where Ricky was forced to strip naked in front of the group, whilst another cult member was forced to sodomize Ricky in front of everybody. But the sexual punishments didn't end there. Gerald would also force the cult members to have sex with one another. Most of the time, these were members of the same gender. He seemed to get off on that. And that's just disgusting, forcing people to have sex with one another. Again, most of the time, Gerald is not even lifting his own finger to punish his cult members. He's just making his cult members turn on each other. He also started making his cult members fill out daily journals. And in their journals, they had to talk about their biggest fears and nightmares. And why did Gerald want to know what his followers' biggest fear and biggest nightmares were? Well, that is because he wanted to make these fears and nightmares come true. Yes, this is just another element of psychological torture. He really is becoming a tyrant. And cult members used to have to sign their own journals with a bloody fingerprint. And because they used their own blood, Gerald said that this was a blood oath, that it was binding. And if they ever broke any agreement that they made during this blood oath, Gerald would curse and torture them for the rest of their lives. Again, this was just another element of how he had complete control over his cult, and it really is just getting worse and worse. And this is how the cult now operated. This kind of treatment, the wheel of punishment, etc., it went on for a few more months. Stephen is still receiving the worst punishments out of everyone, and it got to a point where it was just too much for Stephen and he didn't want to live anymore. So he did try and take his own life. So one day he was out on his motorbike. I'm actually surprised he was even allowed out at all, but he was riding his motorbike and he was driving so fast, so recklessly and dangerously, and he drove at high speed into a wall, attempting to kill himself. Now, he did survive this accident, but he was left in a terrible state. He ended up in hospital with multiple broken ribs, a shattered breastbone, a punctured spleen, and head trauma. After being released from hospital, he did go back to his parents' house, where very sadly he did try and take his own life again. He was eventually referred to psychiatric counselling, and he finally got the help he needed. And I am so happy to say this, but Stephen got out of the cult. From this moment, he never returned to the cult. He got the help that he so desperately needed, and no more harm came to Stephen. And this is actually a period of time where quite a few cult members were getting out. So Gerald's wife, Rosemary, I don't know if she's actually his wife, but his wife, Rosemary, she also escaped the cult. And the number of people in this cult were dropping quite rapidly, because previously the cult number was 50 plus. Well, it was nowhere near that anymore. Gerald was definitely losing his control. But did things get better? No, they didn't. If anything, they actually get worse, because he is losing control, and that is frustrating him. And very sadly, he now turns his punishments onto the children of the cult. Because yes, there are children in this cult, and I do have to warn you that this is not going to be nice to listen to. So Jennifer, Gerald's teenage girlfriend, she had previously given birth to 2 of Gerald's children. She was currently pregnant with a 3rd, and she's still only 18 years old. And whilst Jennifer was pregnant, Gerald continued to beat her up, even though she's pregnant. He would push her to the ground and he would kick her in the stomach. When she's pregnant, he would kick her between the legs. He would cause severe bleeding. And Jennifer did manage to flee, and she went to a women's shelter. However, after only a few days, she did return to the cult. She was so terrified of the death threats that Gerald gave her. So when she returned to the cult, Gerald decided to start abusing one of their daughters that we only know as Baby A. Now, Baby A was only 6 months old. Gerald would lock Baby A in a dark room for hours on end, completely isolating her. Literally solitary confinement. Jennifer would only be allowed to hold, change, and feed her own baby every 6 hours. Gerald would also hit Baby A with a fly swatter. He would just repeatedly hit Baby A in the head until she started crying. And whenever Jennifer objected, he would just beat up Jennifer instead. Gerald also found it entertaining when himself and his right-hand man James would sneak into the baby's room when the baby is sleeping, and they would scream at the top of their lungs, waking up the baby and scaring the baby half to death. Baby A woke up in a state of fear and panic, and Gerald and James found this so hilarious. They would do this all the time. They actually would record themselves doing it and watch it back for their own entertainment. And this next part, I actually can't believe that this happened. So a few months later, when Baby A is a bit older, she's learning how to walk, Gerald instructed James to construct an object that he called the rack. And the rack was essentially a wooden suspension device that Baby A was attached to by her arms, and she would just be hanging in the air by her arms. Gerald would then fasten mason jars filled with water to Baby A's legs when she was strapped to this device, and would just leave her hanging there for hours at a time. And we are talking about a baby here that is definitely under the age of 1. She is being strapped to a device, hung in the air, and mason jars filled with water are attached to her legs. Again, I have to question, how does he come up with this stuff? Now, the reason why Gerald did this was because he wanted to strengthen her legs so she could walk better. But oh my God, this is just pure torture. And also when she's strapped in this device, Gerald would hit her, which would make her legs move up and down. And with the weight of those mason jars, she was in agony. Gerald would also strap weights to her ankles when baby A would crawl around. He also gave her ice cold baths as punishment. And if she wasn't progressing as quickly as Gerald wanted her to, he would, quote, give her a clapping. Now, what was a clapping? It was basically just an open-handed slap as hard as he possibly could around baby A's head, and it would leave her with bruises constantly on the side of her head, all around her ears. So when baby A would be trying to walk, for example, Gerald would say to baby A, do you want a clapping? To which baby A responded by dropping to the ground and covering her head. And this was instinct for her. She had been conditioned to expect pain when Gerald said that phrase, do you want a clapping? And that breaks my heart that she's so young, but all she knows is fear and pain. But things get even worse. There are even allegations that Gerald was sexually abusing baby A as well. No more details have been released on this, so I can't tell you anything more than that. But apparently Gerald was also sexually abusing the other children in the cult as well. And I wouldn't put it past him. I mean, look what this man is capable of. And I just truly have no words. This man is pure evil. And Gerald is just getting away with treating all of the cult members, all of the children like this. People really are just turning a blind eye because the commune or the camp is on a trailer park. There are other people that live on this trailer park that are not a part of the cult, and they are seeing what is going on. Now, to be fair, there were some people that reported what they saw to the police. The police heard rumours of what was going on in this cult, but they didn't do anything. Anytime anybody reported anything, they just didn't believe them. They thought, these people are lying. This is too far-fetched. It's not true. So now we get to the part of the cult where Gerald starts telling all of his followers that the world is going to end, that they need to prepare for the upcoming doomsday. He was telling his followers that the end of society is coming and that they need to overthrow the government. So Gerald and his followers, they started making all kinds of preparations for this said doomsday. They started stockpiling weapons, guns, knives, explosives. They started collecting bomb-making material, instructions on how to make bombs. This cult was turning into a seriously dangerous organization. It's like they were planning a full-scale Waco event right here before Waco even happened. They also began burglarizing from their local neighbors, and they would leave notes after the burglary that said that they would be back to kill them. They left this whole community terrified, but apparently police never linked it back to the cult. And it's like, okay, I understand that it's like late 80s right now, early 90s, but come on, police. Why do you not think that it's the cult that you have been told about that are leaving all of these notes? Like, seriously, that is the first place that you should go. So because the police never linked these notes and these burglaries back to anybody, Gerald and the cult just continue to get away with their actions. But they only get worse because it now takes a very deadly turn. So at this point, we are in January of 1990, approximately 7 to 8 years after the cult first started. And this is when something significant happens, because a man named Franklin Raper joins the cult. Now, Franklin moved his trailer onto the compound and he joined at the same time as a few of his friends. Franklin was around 50 years old, and Franklin was basically the complete opposite of Gerald. He was actually a good person. I don't exactly know why he joined the cult, but he clearly had good intentions because he joined the cult and he did start helping people. And he was helping people genuinely. He really was helping homeless people. He really was inviting people to stay in his trailer out of the goodness of his heart. He wasn't manipulative. He wasn't demanding money. He wasn't dishing out punishments. He was actually just a nice person helping people, which is what Gerald claimed to be in the beginning. But Franklin is actually that person. So Franklin, because he's a good person, he started helping out other members of the cult who were more vulnerable. And Gerald saw this and he was like, no way am I allowing this. He saw Franklin as a threat to his authority because he genuinely was helping people and people were turning to Franklin for help, not Gerald. I think Gerald really was worried that Franklin could overthrow him, even though that was not what Franklin wanted. But in Gerald's mind, that is what was going to happen. So the two men constantly started to argue all of the time. They would both shout at one another. There was huge fights and arguments. Death threats were actually thrown at each other from both sides. And this went on for 4 months, this tension between these two men, until Gerald decided to take matters into his own hands. Gerald ordered some of his cronies to drag Franklin's trailer off of the compound before setting Franklin's car on fire and burning it to the ground. And as you can imagine, when Franklin discovered that it was Gerald that did this, he was not happy at all, because who would be happy about that? He actually told Gerald that he would be over that evening to kill him. So tensions were definitely high between these two men. However, now we get to the 20th of May, 1990, and things now take a very gruesome turn, because Gerald gathered 5 of his most loyal cronies from his cult, which obviously included his right-hand man, James, a man named Jason LaMarche, a man named Ronald Wiley, and 21-year-old Ricky, who obviously Gerald has been torturing and punishing since he was 15 years old. He's now 21. And alongside these 4 men was a woman that Gerald recruited as well, called Michelle Evans, who was apparently a bit more friendly with Franklin, and she was going to be the quote-unquote inside man. So Michelle, because she knew Franklin or was more friendly with him, she was able to give Gerald the layout of his trailer. And Gerald came up with a plan that was essentially he wanted to kill Franklin and everyone that was inside the trailer. And Michelle was going to be a key part in luring everyone in that trailer into one room. So Gerald gave out the weapons. He gave out knives, bats. He also gave out masks for them all to wear. And this is now when their deadly mission began. So Michelle went into the trailer first alone, and she gathered the 4 people that were in the trailer into the living room. And these 4 people were Franklin, a man named Dennis Colwell, a man named Richard Ritchie, and a woman named Darlene Paris. Once they were all gathered in the living room, this is when Gerald and his other 4 cronies burst in and began their attack. And from this point forward, all hell breaks loose. It is so chaotic. It happened so quickly. Gerald went straight for Franklin, and he just started hitting Franklin over the head repeatedly. Darlene then started screaming, "Oh God, oh God." She began pleading for her life before Gerald instructed Ricky to shut her up. So then Ricky started beating Darlene with a bat. James, the right-hand man, had burst into the trailer, and he started attacking the other man, Dennis, that was in the living room with a knife. The other crony, Jason, also joined in. He broke Franklin's arm using a pistol and started hitting him over the head with the pistol. By this point, Gerald had beaten Franklin's face so badly that Franklin's teeth had started to fall out. There was blood everywhere. Like, I literally cannot emphasize enough how brutal and frantic this attack was. It was complete mayhem, chaos. The group also cut the electricity, so it was completely dark. They're all wearing masks as well, don't forget. It was literally like a horror movie. So Ricky, as we know, is attacking the woman in the living room, Darlene, but after hitting her a few times with the bat, she was still screaming. He could not shut her up. So this is when Gerald instructed Ricky to slit her throat. And this is exactly what Ricky did. He pulled out his knife. He grabbed Darlene by her hair, and he just started sawing at her throat with a combat knife until he hit bone. He basically nearly decapitated her. By this point, the 4th victim, Richard, had run outside of the trailer, but one of Gerald's cronies followed him out, and he was currently being stabbed to death right outside the trailer, and other neighbours on this trailer park were witnessing him being stabbed to death. Authorities were called, however, tragically, it was all too late, because in a matter of minutes, that is how quick this attack was. All 4 of those victims in that trailer had lost their lives. So that is Franklin Raper, Dennis Colwell, Richard Ritchie, and Darlene Paris. They all lost their lives from this brutal attack. And it was just truly, truly horrific. Now, after these brutal murders, the cult members that were involved, they fled the scene. One of the cult members, Ronald, told Gerald that he saw someone watching them. Like, he saw somebody witnessing them attacking all of these people in the trailer. Now, Gerald was so angry with Ronald because he was like, well, if you saw somebody witnessing what we were doing, why did you not go over and kill them? Moments after the group fled the scene, this is when police arrive. And the scene that the police came across truly was a horror scene. The first victim, Richard, was lying on the grass outside of the trailer. He suffered multiple stab wounds to the neck, back, stomach, and liver, as well as defensive wounds. His throat had also been cut, and any one of these injuries could have resulted in his death. They also found Dennis Colwell, who had suffered a skull fracture, cut and stab wounds to his face, multiple stab wounds to his skull. He also had stab wounds to his chest and liver. Next to him was Darlene Paris, who had multiple stab wounds on her scalp, neck, chest, and spine, and her cause of death was a slit throat that almost left her decapitated. And finally, next to her was Franklin Raper, who had suffered extensive and fatal head injuries with a baseball bat. His face was completely deformed, bone fragments had been driven deep into his brain, his left arm had been broken, and he had a stab wound to his neck. And the police immediately launched their investigation, but this is when a massive twist in the case occurs that the cult members were not expecting, because they had actually left a survivor behind. So we know that Michelle went into the trailer first and she gathered everyone in that trailer in the living room. Well, she was only aware of 4 people in that trailer, but there was actually a 5th. And this was a woman named Donna Alvarez. She was homeless and she had been offered a place to stay for the night by Franklin. So she was asleep in one of the bedrooms. And Michelle had no idea that Donna was there. So when the attack started, Donna fled out of a window. She hid in some nearby bushes and she saw the attackers leave the trailer. Now again, if you remember, the attackers were wearing masks. Well, she witnessed one of the attackers removing their mask. The attackers left, Donna ran to a neighbor's house, dialed 911, and she was able to give a description of one of the attackers. And when the police got her description, the police were like, hold on a minute, that sounds exactly like Jason LaMarche. He's that guy that lives at that weird compound just around the corner that we have been ignoring for years and just hoping would go away. So the police immediately find Jason LaMarche, arrest him and bring him in. And this is where the downfall begins. He soon turned on the others. He started giving out the names of the cult members to save his own skin, and he told the police all about the cult. So the police brought in Ricky, the 21-year-old, and they realized that he was the weakest link. And they were right, because Ricky soon cracked. He also confirmed everything to the police about the cult, and he also told the police about all of the abuse that he had suffered at the hands of Gerald for all of those years. He confessed to the police all about the murder plot of Franklin, and he gave all of the names of everyone that carried out the attack. So the police went out and rounded up the cult members that carried out the attack and arrested them all. And eventually the case goes to trial. Gerald, James, and Ricky were all charged with 4 counts of murder, whilst Jason and Ronald were charged with 4 counts of second-degree murder. Michelle was also charged as being an accessory to murder, and it didn't take too long before all 6 of these evil people were found guilty. So Michelle was sentenced to only 1 year in prison in exchange for her testimony against the others. Jason and Ronald were both sentenced to 62 years, and Gerald, James, and Ricky, they were all sentenced to death, and all 3 men still sit on death row to this very day. And Jason and Ronald are obviously still in prison as well with their prison sentences, so it's only Michelle that has been released. And who knows if they ever actually will face the death penalty or not. And obviously, as soon as Gerald went to prison, the rest of the cult dissolved, and the cult no longer existed. And that was a crazy case. And it blows my mind that this cult did not receive more media coverage. It's just crazy what this court possibly could have done if it wasn't for Gerald being very insecure about Franklin, because they were stockpiling weapons. Like, they literally could have been another Waco, which is terrifying to think about. But I just want to end this video remembering the victims of today's case. And sadly, we don't know too much information about the victims, so I can't tell you much. We don't even have images of all of the victims, but 4 innocent people lost their lives. And they were Franklin Raper, Dennis Colwell, Richard Ritchie, and Darlene Paris. And they were all taken far, far too soon. And my heart goes out to all of the victims of today's case, everyone that was subjected to Gerald and his abuse. And I'm just so glad that he is behind bars where he deserves to be and everyone can get away from him. So as always, let me know your thoughts, theories, and opinions on today's case. And don't forget to leave me your case suggestions in the comments down below, because I always want to know what you want to hear next. Thank you again to Matchmasters for sponsoring today's video, and I'll see you all in my next one. Bye.